All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our briefing today on the City of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page, or tune in to 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kevin, and good afternoon, everyone. Today's update includes a mix of troubling and also promising news. First, I want to acknowledge the tragic shooting near Lincoln High School in Mayfair on Monday. An innocent bystander was senselessly killed and another student critically injured, and yet another example of the horrific preventable violence that is devastating families and communities across our city. An incidents like the one on Sept over the weekend should never happen. We need people to report crimes when they see them. It's outrageous and infuriating that no one on the train called 911 when someone was in distress. Sept and Upper Darby police thankfully have the suspect in custody. While investigations continue regarding these incidents, I also want to recognize and commend the work of our police department and other first responders in the wake of two horrific workplace shootings that happened recently. In both instances, their quick response in finding the perpetrators stopped the situations from becoming even more tragic. We continue to urge anyone with information about heinous acts of violence to report it anonymously to 215-686-TIPS, TIPS, so we can prevent senseless violence that is tearing our communities apart. We're employing everything we can to address the crisis. On that note, we're proud that the Philadelphia Police Department was recently selected to participate in the U.S. Department of Justice's National Public Safety Partnership. As part of the partnership, PPD will receive intensive training and technical assistance from the DOJ in the areas of gun violence prevention, criminal justice collaboration, community engagement, federal partnerships, and more. This will help us identify, assess, and implement collaborative strategies and a lasting coordination structure to prevent and combat violent crime, especially related to gun, drug, and gang violence. This is a big win for the city, and it comes at no cost to our taxpayers. In addition, last week, a partnership with City Council, we announced the first round of Anti-Violence Community Expansion Grant Program awardees. 5 organizations doing anti-violence work on the ground in the community will receive more than $2.2 million in funding, with many more grants to be announced in the coming weeks. Today, we have 2 of those organizations that receive funding to talk about how this program will help their anti-violence efforts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Erica Atwood, Senior Director of the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety, for more information. Erica?
Thank you, Mayor Kenney, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, just to reiterate, we announced the first of what we know will be multiple grantees last week for our community expansion grants. The program, which was announced in July of 2020 in partnership with Mayor Kenney and City Council, we will be making a $22 million investment in these anti-violence community partnerships. Again, this is the first of multiple grantees. We will be announcing awardees on a rolling basis. The grantees in this round include Man Up PHL, Beyond the Bars, Uplift Workforce Solutions, and today I'd like to introduce you to Every Murder is Real and New Options for More Opportunities. With that, I'll hand it over to Ricky Duncan from New Options, More Opportunities, aka NOMO.
Thank you, Eric, and I do apologize for my camera for whatever reason it's not coming on. It's playing little tricks on me. But I want to start off by thanking the City of Philadelphia for believing us and honoring us for our work by enriching us with this grant to be able to continue to create new options and more opportunity to end the gun violence in Philadelphia. I find this to be a win for all grassroots organizations that's been in the fight along with us, trying to heal our community mentally, emotionally, and financially and physically. Through trauma-informed care, workforce development, life skills training, and to create affordable housing. And I think this is going to be able to I don't think this is a step that we're going to be able to just stop gun violence overnight, but I think this is a step in the right direction. And I thank you for the opportunity. And I'll turn it over to Shante.
Hello, everyone. And thank you, my brother, Ricky, but I wanted to say I'm Shantae Love from Emir Healing Center, and Emir Healing Center stands for Every Murder is Real. We are a community-based organization that educates, advocates, and supports families impacted by homicide and violent crimes. We offer trauma-informed and holistic approaches to healing, and what we do know is that untreated trauma perpetuates violence. And we're at the front of it, not only trying to help them heal, but those who have been exposed, being able to get trauma-informed services, mental health therapy, counseling, and the things that we know help wrap services around communities in order for them to thrive and go past this part of just surviving. I'm very, very pleased and very excited that we were the recipients, but this is just the beginning, because I do believe that the partnerships of community as well as partnerships of law enforcement and community, hospital-based and community, elected officials in community is too important. What we do know is that community-based organizations are the arm of those in the neighborhoods, and that if we're going to stop violence, they must be a part of that. And us being a part of it is a win, as my brother said, for all of us, because this is a paradigm shift. This is not the only piece. There's a lot of Shantaes and Rickies out there, and we wish to support them all. And I'm very happy to say that my partners, we will continue to do this work. We've also have new partners that will move forward. And this is a win for all of us, and we do get to fix this. We do get to fix this. And I want to say thank you to not only to our mayor, but also our council members, all of those who support us in this work we do.
Thank you, Shantae. And as a reminder, the funding priorities for our community expansion grants are safe havens, mentorship, trauma-informed supports and services, and restorative practices. And we will be announcing grantees on a rolling basis with an expected cohort to be around 35 grantees. And with that, I will hand it over to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon. During the past few press conferences, we've been discussing how violent crimes are steadily trending in the right direction. As Deputy Commissioner of Patrol Operations Joel Dale will highlight a bit later, we are currently seeing a slight increase of shooting and homicides overall throughout the city. But with that said, the overall reductions in violent crime, specifically within our pinpoint grids, are continuing to decrease at a strong and steady rate. This means that our Operation Pinpoint strategy is working, with significant decreases in violent crimes throughout multiple districts across the city. In fact, several districts have seen double-digit decreases in homicides since the last year, and 6 have seen double-digit decreases in non-fatal shootings. For example, in the 1st district, under the leadership of Captain Safino, we've seen a 41% decrease in shooting victims and a 26% decrease in homicides. In the 12th district, under the leadership of Captain Driscoll, we've seen a 13% decrease in shooting victims and 10% decrease in homicides. In the 14th district, under the leadership of Captain Smith, we've seen an 18% decrease in shooting victims and a 39% decrease in homicides. In the 15th district, under Captain Walker, we've seen an 11% decrease in shooting victims. And even though it's flat, it's even, we've seen a 0% increase in our homicides there. In the 17th district, under the leadership of Captain O'Donnell, we've seen a 46% decrease in shooting victims and a 43% decrease in homicides. And then also in the 26th district, under the leadership of Captain Fisher, while we've seen a slight increase of 4% in our shooting victims, we've seen a 42% decrease in our homicides. In addition to these promising statistics, we've also seen some exceptional early results in our newly formed Kensington District. Under the leadership of Lieutenant Lee, which falls under the direction of Captain Rosario. For those who don't know, the Kensington District began operations on January 24th of this year. This new police district is not only a reflection of our pinpoint crime fighting strategy, but also an illustration of the type of hand-in-hand efforts police are trying to accomplish within the neighborhoods that they serve. The purpose of this smaller district is to ensure that the police work closely with this particular community, which has been plagued with increased violent crime and continued narcotics issues for generations. The results of this new crime fighting effort have been fairly significant. Since the district's formation, the area has experienced an overall decrease of 17% in violent crime, and most notably, a 32% reduction in shooting victims, as well as a 43% reduction in aggravated assaults with a firearm. Additionally, we've seen an overall reduction in property crime by 23%, with a reduction in residential burglaries reduced by 50% over the same period last year. Through the combined effort of Kensington District, our East Division personnel, along with support of narcotics enforcement, the district boundaries has achieved a 127% increase in arrests for VUFA, or violation of the Uniform Fire Act. That's right, a 127% increase in the amount of arrests for individuals carrying illegal guns. While positive returns within these varying districts are geographically spread throughout the city, overall, yes, shootings and homicides are still up. And we still have a lot of work left to do. And we must continue to chip away at the violent crime that's touching every single one of our communities. These positive trends haven't occurred overnight. And thanks to the continued efforts of our officers who, despite reduced resources, continue to make a record number of gun confiscations and gun arrests. As of today, we are 167 gun confiscations short of what we recovered just all of last year. We are well on track to significantly surpassing last year's numbers, a year where we are set to record an all-time high in both categories. Briefly switching gears, during last week's City Council hearings, we, PPD and Council, discussed our staffing levels and how those staffing numbers have slowly been dwindling away for various reasons. While our operations aren't impacted by these staffing shortages at this point, if our recruitment applicant rate does not intensify and we don't get our open positions filled, the PPD may have some difficulty providing basic public safety services to the community. To that end, I encourage anyone who's interested in becoming a police officer to apply. Please apply and be the difference. We are in the midst of a movement in policing, and we need individuals with unique experiences from all walks of life to join our ranks. We will be holding a recruitment drive starting November 1st and ending on November 30th. Anyone who's interested in becoming a Philadelphia police officer is encouraged to visit our website at www.joinphillypd.com for more information. But before I also turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who's our Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, who will provide an update on a number of cases that we wish to highlight, I want to discuss some recent incidents that occurred throughout our city. This past Monday, a tragic double shooting occurred outside of Lincoln High School in the Northeast. In this shooting, a 66-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy were struck. Jeffrey Carter, the 66-year-old victim who was simply driving by in his vehicle, was fatally struck in the barrage of gunfire. The second victim, a student from Lincoln, remains in critical condition at an area hospital. Although this appears to be an isolated incident at this time, we will continue to work with school safety officers and the School District of Philadelphia to ensure that incidents like this do not happen again. As we've discussed in previous meetings, the Safe Corridors program is a joint effort between the PPD, the school district, and community partners to ensure that our students remain safe, not only while in school, but on their way to and from school as well. On our end, the PPD will increase patrols around Lincoln High School and continue to gather intelligence through multiple mediums to ensure that there are no retaliatory actions as a result of this incident. I lament the fact that anyone, was not able to stop this incident from occurring. However, I am beyond grateful and thankful that there were 2 officers there who were posted outside of the school and that they were able to quickly apprehend the individual responsible. They are heroes. At a busy time when there were dozens, if not hundreds of children in the area, we are very fortunate that there were not additional victims. I also want to take this time to acknowledge the bravery of my officers, particularly over the past several weeks. On October 1st, 2021, a man entered an office building in the 5200 block of Old York Road. The gunman, using a homemade zip gun, encountered an unarmed security guard and killed him. PPD officers raced to the scene where they encountered the gunman and quickly apprehended him without additional injuries to civilians or to the offender. Then, 3 days later, An employee walked into Jefferson Hospital with a firearm and shot and killed a coworker of the hospital. He then left the hospital in a U-Haul truck. Officers encountered the male suspect, now armed with a rifle, at the 3800 block of Lansdowne Drive, and a gun battle ensued. The suspect was shot twice, once in the left collarbone and once in the right collarbone. 2 of our officers were also wounded in this exchange of gunfire. Officer Arsenio Perez was shot once in the right arm, and Officer Edwin Perez was grazed in the nose. We are extremely lucky that these officers survived. And I, along with the members of the PPD, wish them a full and speedy recovery. All of these officers showed extraordinary courage, and there are many, many more just like them who run towards gunfire on a daily basis and get little accolades. I want to thank our officers for their continued efforts and their dedication in keeping our city safe. These 3 incidents highlight the fact that when individuals armed with guns are intent on doing
stopped.
Circumstances and opportunities,
Recording in progress.
To put their plans in action. All 3 of these killers were quickly stopped by our officers, but these situations have to be mitigated on the front end, and it's going to take all of us, the entire community, to make sure that happens. I will now turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales, who will provide an update on our crime statistics. And before I do, I'd like to briefly mention that myself and Acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, Jennifer Arbertier Williams, are hosting an Asian Community Safety Initiative virtual town hall tonight at 5:30. At this town hall meeting, we will discuss collaboration with law enforcement agencies that will work together to investigate and prosecute hate crimes and violent crimes directed at the Asian community in Philadelphia and the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. I invite you to join us tonight on Facebook, and if you can, also find or follow a link on the Twitter account, my Twitter account at PPD Commish, as well as the main PPD Twitter account at Philly Police. Deputy Commissioner Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can you pull up the slides, please? Okay, go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart, year to date, as of October 17th of this year, Philadelphia had 438 homicides and 1,868 shooting victims. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 14%, 438 this year versus 385 last year, and shooting victims are up 9%, 1868 this year versus 1720 last year. Looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides, which are the same every week. The motives are arguments, drugs, and domestic. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats weekly comparison. From October 11th, if you look to the far right of the chart, from October 11th to October 17th, we had 7 homicides, 33 shooting victims, which include the homicides and multiple shooting victims, and 31 shooting occurrences. I want to point out that 3 of the homicides for this week are delayed cases where the victims later succumbed to their injuries. The first case, the date of the assault occurred actually last year in December. So we're carrying those numbers in that number 7 for this week. And also the second case was May 20th of this year, and the third was October 3rd of this year. This week, all 3 cases were ruled a homicide. So that's why we're carrying them within that number 7. So technically we had 4 homicides this week. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in our pinpoint grids. If you look at the top chart, it shows citywide homicides up 14%. And looking at the bottom chart, it shows homicides in the pinpoint grids up 3%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 9%, and the pinpoint grids are down 13%. So as you can see, we're seeing that steady downward trend. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show this slide to show you where we are when you look at the 6-week year-to-date percent comparison. So this week we are in the green. Green is good, red is bad. So at the top of the chart, you see the citywide homicides and shooting victims. As you can see, in comparison to last week, we are actually down in comparison to last week. We have 14% this week versus 15 last week. If you look at December, you start to see that downward trend from December 20th, I will say, all the way down to October 11th. Same with the shooting victims as a whole citywide. We're down 9%. And if you look at last week, we were down 10%, vice versa with the prior week's 11%. Looking at the bottom of the chart, which is our pinpoint grids, we are in the red, which is slightly up in comparison to last week. We were at 2% last week. We are slightly up 3% this week. And as far as our shooting victims, we are down 13%, which we were at the same percentage last week. Next slide, please. This slide shows the year-end total VOOF arrests for 2017 through 2020. And the total VOOF arrests year to date for 2021 from January 1st to October 18th. VOOFA is an acronym for Violation of Uniform Firearms Act. So when I mention VOOF arrest, it basically means that the person was arrested for illegally possessing a firearm. In 2020, we reached an all-time high for VOOF arrests. I know I mention this every 2 weeks, but I just want to stress that that was our all-time high, was 2,324. And so far this year, we have made 2,100 VOOF arrests. I would also like to point out that this time last year, we had 1,641 VOOF arrests, which is a 28% increase when compared to the year-to-date total. Next slide, please. All right, as of October 18th of 2021, we are at 4,822 crime guns that we recovered in our city. A crime gun is any gun recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation. I also want to make note that this number does not include guns from the buyback or turn-in programs that were running this year. Last year, we recovered 4,015 crime guns by the end of October. And comparing that number to this year's number year to date, which again is 4,822, we're currently showing a 20% increase, which is 807 more crime guns recovered this year compared to last year, from January to the end of October. And again, we didn't finish October yet, but we're already at 4,822. If we continue at this rate, we will reach a total of 6,048 by the end of the year. Next slide, please. And lastly, year to date, 460 privately made firearms, which is also known as ghost guns, were recovered in Philadelphia. I'd like to point out that in 2020, a total of 250 ghost guns were recovered by the end of the year. As of October 18th, we have surpassed that number, as you can see. This shows a significant increase in ghost guns recovered this year in comparison to 2020 and 2019. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, and he will speak about cases we wish to highlight.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to be providing several updates on arrests of multiple homicide suspects, in fact, a whole bunch, as well as an arrest of a suspect who committed multiple point-of-gun commercial robberies throughout the northeast section of Philadelphia recently. So, Kevin, if you can put up the first video, this is a compilation. Okay, this is going to be a compilation. Here it is, a compilation of a number of robberies that occurred in the Northeast. So while this isn't a homicide or a shooting, it's important to highlight this, I believe, because it shows that there are other crimes that we do focus on. This individual is a suspect who committed 11 commercial robberies throughout the Northeast. Started on September the 28th, and on that date, Northeast detectives recognized a pattern of gunpoint commercial robberies in the 15th and the 2nd districts. It involved a smoke shop and a beer distributor. It involved a black male wearing a black Adidas hooded sweatshirt. He had green camouflage sleeves. And in both of the cases, the offender selected merchandise and brought it to the counter. And you're seeing a snippet of each of those robberies that was captured on the video. When the employee opened the register, the offender produced a black pistol. He racked the slide and he demanded money. Over the next week, he continued to commit several of the commercial robberies throughout the Northeast with the same pattern. And then on October the 5th, command staff had all gotten together to develop a comprehensive response plan of action to respond to the pattern and get him in custody. And on that same day, October the 5th, the offender robbed the beer store in the 7th district at around 7 o'clock. And at 8 o'clock, He robbed a smoke shop on the 14,000 block of Bustleton Avenue. And then 20 minutes later, he robbed a beer distributor on the 13,500 block of Bustleton Avenue. Uniformed police flooded the area. Responding officers noticed the man standing on the corner across the street from the beer distributor at the bus stop, identified him as a possible suspect. When the officers attempted to make contact with him, he fled. The officers pursued the male, eventually apprehending him. Recovered from his waistband was a Masada 9mm pistol. Also recovered was a black Adidas hooded sweatshirt with green camouflage sleeves, which matched the description of the clothing worn in all the other robberies. He's been identified as Michael Malcolm, a 24-year-old male from the 2100 block of North 22nd Street. He was arrested. He was charged with 11 commercial robberies. So that is the Northeast pattern. And now I'm going to go into update on numerous homicides. Kevin, if you can change this to the next video. And what you're going to be seeing is a video from an incident that occurred on May 31st, as you can see on your screen. It was at 12:53 p.m. Officers responded to a report of a shooting at 500 North 16th Street. That's just above Spring Garden Street on 16th Street. We located the first victim was a 27-year-old male, Kasim Roberts. He was on the highway. He was suffering from gunshot wounds to the head. And a second victim, 22-year-old male, Raheem Hightower. He was in the passenger seat of that vehicle that you saw move from the scene. They were both passengers inside of a Chevrolet Malibu, and they both suffered gunshot wounds to the head. In the video that you saw, the Chevy is parked on the street. Male gets into the rear of the seat behind the drivers. After that, from the video, there's actually a puff of smoke that comes from the Chevrolet. And as the Chevrolet moves forward, the male, who is our shooter, jumps out of the back of that vehicle. He falls to the ground. He has an object in his hand. He gets into a vehicle that is just behind where the Chevrolet is, and he flees. He goes backwards. He retreats towards the south on 16th Street. The detectives worked very hard and swiftly to identify the suspect. We recovered evidence from the scene, and it led us to Kyron Connor. He's a 27-year-old black male. And on June 5th, just days after the incident occurred, we obtained an arrest warrant for 2 counts of murder, conspiracy, VUFA, violation of the Uniform Firearms Act related offenses on Kyron Connor. He remained a fugitive, and he was somebody that we were searching very diligently for. And then on September the 5th, the U.S. Marshals Service, United States Marshal Service, their fugitive task force in Wilmington, based on information that was supplied by our investigators, they arrested him in Delaware, and he's now awaiting extradition to Philadelphia to be formally charged with those murders from May. Now what you're seeing on the screen is going to be these are going to be pictures of individuals that we've arrested in these past 3 weeks since the last press conference. What you see on the screen right now is a picture of Mr. Ramirez. And this incident occurred on September the 23rd, just under a month ago. At 8:30, officers responded to 1300 block of Wakeling Street in the lower Northeast for a report of a person with a gun and a shooting. When the officers arrived, they located an unidentified victim who had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head and the body. In the following morning, on September the 24th, family members of Amori Nunez, a 34-year-old Hispanic male, reported to police that he'd been abducted. Mr. Nunez had been abducted, and that on September the 23rd, the day before, they were contacted by unknown individuals demanding a large ransom for the return of Mr. Nunez. Our Special Victims Unit, which was initially running on this incident as a result of a possible abduction, they were quickly able to connect the report of the abduction to the unidentified victim and recognize that the person being reported as abducted was in fact the individual who was found deceased on the day before, and that was Amori Nunez. Through a coordinated effort by our Homicide Unit and our Special Victims Unit, detectives quickly developed the suspect and learned that the suspect, who's identified as Mitchell Ramirez, who you see on the screen, 29-year-old Hispanic male, had been arrested just hours after the police had discovered the body of the victim. This male was arrested on an unrelated charge, but it did involve an arrest with a gun. The firearm was recovered, and a ballistics identification match between the firearm recovered from the arrest of Mr. Ramirez was compared to the scene from the ballistics from the homicide back on Wakeling Street, and it was a match. So on October the 1st, our homicide detectives obtained the arrest warrant for murder, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, conspiracy, violation of Uniform Firearms Act, and related offenses on Mitchell Ramirez. And on October the 6th, while Mitchell Ramirez was still in the CFCF in our jail, he was still in custody. Our homicide unit brought him down, and he was charged with the brutal murder and kidnapping of Amari Nunez. And now I'm going to go through a whole list of others that we've arrested, and I'll quickly provide some information on each of these arrest photos that you're able to see. Since that last press conference on the 29th, since the last press conference on the 29th, we've arrested 13 individuals wanted for recent homicides, and that includes the two that I spoke about, Mitchell Ramirez as well as Kyron Connor. The others are, you have a picture of Russell Hill up on the screen. And on May 9th of this year, two victims, Markel Amir Smith Rafi, a 23-year-old male, and Samir Lindsay, 17-year-old male, along with two other shooting victims, were found shot multiple times at 147 East Albana Street. An arrest warrant was obtained on May 14th, and an offender, this offender, Russell Hill, was arrested on September 30th of this year for the double homicide. I spoke about this incident before. This is the second arrest made in reference to the case. We had previously arrested D'Angelo Thomas on May 16th for this double homicide. Now you can go to the next one. This is a photo of Terence Johnson, an arrest photo of Terence Johnson. The incident was on May 28th. Our victim, Vincent McLean, 35-year-old male, was found suffering multiple gunshot wounds to the body in the 800 block of East Allegheny Avenue. I spoke about this in a previous press conference back in August. At that time, I had video from a store. It was very good video, but we were not able to identify who the individuals were in the video. We received we got some help, and we also received some excellent information from other police officers who came to recognize the people from the video. And on October the 12th, we obtained an arrest warrant for Terence Johnson, who you see on the screen. He's 28 years old. And on October 13th, Terence Johnson was arrested for that murder. The next incident involves an arrest of Zabria Mack. You can go to the next photo, Kevin. And this incident is from July 16th. And our victim, Tyree Wilson, a 21-year-old male, was found suffering from a gunshot wound to the chest in the 1300 block of West Hunting Park Avenue. We obtained arrest warrants on October the 13th for Zabria Mack and Kwai Alton. And on October 13th, Zabria Mack, who's an 18-year-old female, you see on the left, was arrested for the homicide. Kwai Alton, 20-year-old male, is not in custody, remains a fugitive at this time. The next one is a photo of Luis Velasquez. And on the screen on Luis Velasquez, he is the co-conspirator, somebody I announced the arrest of previously, Teresa Coleman. She was arrested on September 20th. I spoke about that one at the last press conference. This references back to an incident that occurred on August the 15th. A 45-year-old male, Ronald Thrower, he was stabbed multiple times in the 4300 block of Griscom Street. We obtained the arrest warrant on September the 10th. And Mr. Velasquez was arrested on October the 7th. The next incident is to announce the arrest of Tyree Moment, and that was from an incident that occurred on August 2nd. Our victim, Damon Hayes, a 45-year-old male, was found unresponsive at 22nd and Spruce Street. The offender, Mr. Moment, Tyree Moment, 40 years old, he did remain at the scene. He approached responding officers, informed the officers that the victim was in fact his brother-in-law, and they had a physical altercation. The offender was originally arrested on August the 2nd for the aggravated assault while we were awaiting, and then subsequently, as the victim of this incident had died and was pronounced, we were awaiting a cause of death. It had been undetermined at that time. On October the 8th, the medical examiner's office did rule that Damon Hayes' death was a homicide, that the cause of death was traumatic asphyxia. And the district attorney's office, after being apprised of the facts, and the circumstances. They approved the charges, the additional charges against Mr. Moment. He was arrested on October the 8th, and he was charged with murder, stalking, and related offenses. Now on your screen is a picture of Javon Dodd. On September 12th, the victim is Hanif P.A., a 24-year-old male. He was shot twice in the head in the 5000 block of Germantown Avenue. There were 2 other victims of the shooting that survived, and an arrest warrant was obtained on October the 7th. The offender, Javon Dodd, 33 years old, was arrested on October the 8th for this homicide. Now there's a photo of Lonnie Coleman. On September 18th, a victim, James Steele, 54 years old, was shot multiple times in the head and the body in the 2200 block of West Cambria Street. Offender Lonnie Coleman, 38 years old, was arrested on October the 2nd for this homicide. Next is a photo of Kamir McDonald. You can go to the next, thank you. On September 22nd of this year, victim Nakia Collins, a 30-year-old female, was found shot inside of a vehicle multiple times at 37th and Aspen Street. Arrest warrant was obtained on September the 28th. And the offender, Kamir McDonald, 18 years old, was arrested on October the 1st for the homicide. And the next one is an arrest photo of Kanaz Ibn Farouk. And on October the 3rd, our victim, 45-year-old Gregory Wright, was found shot, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds to his body and the back of his head in the 5900 block of Market Street. The offender, Kanaz Ibn Farouk, 27 years old, was arrested moments after the homicide. And the commissioner mentioned the 2 active shooting incidents that our officers bravely responded to. This is a photo, it's already been released, of Wayne Dorless. This is the active shooter case that happened at 5201 Old York Road. Our victim, the victim, Nasir Day, 25 years old, was working as a security guard at the location. Officers quickly responded, devised a tactical approach based on their training, were able to locate the offender, Wayne Dorless, 59 years old. He was still on location. Commissioner mentioned he had a homemade weapon that fired shotgun. And the last one that I have a photo of is the photo of Mr. Stacey Hayes. And this one refers to the incident from October the 4th, where the victim was Andre James, 43-year-old male. He'd been discovered shot multiple times in the arm, the back, the head on the 9th floor of Jefferson University Hospital at 111 South 11th Street. The offender fled before the officers arrived, but shortly thereafter, we located the offender, Stacey Hayes, on Lansdowne Drive behind the School of the Future at 4000 Parkside Avenue. And it was not known to the officers at that time that this offender had just killed a man inside of Jefferson Hospital 1 hour earlier. He was carrying an AR-15 at this time. He was also wearing a ballistic vest, a bulletproof vest. Upon approach, the offender immediately began shooting at the officers. And despite incredible dangers to themselves, the officers bravely engaged in an exchange of gunfire with the offender, resulted in 2 of our officers were shot, as the commissioner mentioned in her presentation. The offender was also shot during the incident. He was taken into custody. We are thankful that our officers are going to survive. And I can't praise them enough for their bravery and their poise in such a stressful situation. These 2 events from a few weeks back dramatically demonstrate the dangerous challenges that our dedicated officers may face at any time while providing first responder service to the citizens of Philadelphia. And finally, I'm going to touch on the incident that the commissioner also spoke of, who I don't have the photo of, but that is the arrest of Aaron Scott, 21 years old, for the incident that occurred just on Monday at Lincoln High School. And in that incident, our victim, a 65-year-old male, Jeffrey Carter, was a completely innocent male individual who was driving along the roadway, probably on his way, we believe on his way home, and shots were being fired as a result of a dispute that had happened between the brother of our shooter and others. And the shooter fired multiple times. He struck Mr. Carter in the head. He died a short time later at the hospital. And a 16-year-old victim is still in critical condition. We're hopeful that he will be able to survive as a result of that shooting. So that covers a lot of the things that the homicide investigations from the last 3. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin at the mayor's office.
Thank you. We will now move to Q&A for members of the press. Because of limited time, only one representative from each media outlet is permitted to ask questions. And we're going to start with 2 questions or fewer, just given the timing right now, and potentially open it up after that. So 1 media outlet and 2 questions per reporter. Today, we are limiting topics in the first round to questions related to presentations. Armando is also available for Spanish interpretation as needed. So first up, we're going to go to Kristen Johansson of KYW.
Hello, yes. So the first question, this is for Commissioner Outlaw. So you mentioned that there's a decrease in crime and violent crime in the Pinpoint grids. 1, what do you attribute that to? And 2, if there's a decrease in those grids, why not expand the grid, I guess, the Pinpoint areas to other maybe more violent areas?
Thank you for that question. I think that's a common sense question too, because we typically say, hey, we know what's working there. Why not do it everywhere? The whole point behind Pinpoint and using our grid system or our grid model is making sure that we're following the data. We know that these grids are smaller parts of the city that's driving the largest percentage of the crime. If we're able to continue, sustain, and increase the gains that we're seeing in these pinpoint areas, ultimately what should happen is that citywide, the numbers will go down. That's what we're working toward. Prior to my arrival, when I arrived here, we only had a small amount of pinpoint grids for various reasons. We needed to hire more analysts, so on and so forth. It was a resource issue. We've since expanded the grid so that they're citywide. So we do have citywide coverage within these grids. And again, we are flooding these areas because that's where the data is taking us. We know that it works. And again, I highlighted maybe 6 or 7 districts, but that doesn't include, we have over 40 districts, pinpoint grids in the city. So we're still working to ensure that we're seeing these gains in other parts of the city too. But we all know that neighborhoods and communities differ. So hopefully that answers your question. We do have citywide coverage, but we're still following the data with the resources that we have.
And I'm not counting this as my second question, but the attribution, what do you attribute the...
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Again, we have a framework that was put in place. There is a plan. We have an operating model. Pinpoint utilizes all of the best approaches or what's considered best practices all throughout the country, whether it's collaboration with local, state, and federal partners, but then also including collaboration with human services, community engagement and inclusion, and making sure that we are focusing on the right people and or groups and or areas. It's real easy to take shots in the dark and flood areas and throw bodies or resources somewhere where the issues aren't occurring. We also know, we've done several press conferences, but in some areas, like in the Southwest portion of the city, we knew we were able to take a big bite out of what was going on or chip away at what was going on because of our federal and our state partnerships, our involvement on task forces, whether it's regarding narcotics or guns. So that we're seeing a significant amount of decreases in those areas because of the enlistment of the help of our partners as well.
And my second question is, last week during City Council, it was suggested, I'll say, that there would be a delay in the 1-year residency requirement for police officers because we were down, you said, about 5,100. Has there been any more discussion about that?
Not since last week. I know it's been a conversation brought forth. My role is to advocate on behalf of the organization and my officers. And if we see that, I talked about barriers to entry. While it's still too early to tell whether or not it's a hindrance, we know that it will have an impact moving forward. It's had an impact thus far because the number of people that are eligible have lessened. We are working off of 2 previous lists from previous years because we were able to get waivers. But at some point, and I think the time is now, we have to revisit or reassess whether or not this is a very clear barrier. But it's amongst other things as well. It's not just that. It's also, we don't have the same amount of people that are interested in being cops.
I mean, I talk about this all the time with everyone that will listen. It makes no sense intuitively not to be able to recruit nationwide. And it makes no sense that anyone nationwide would want to commit to a year of living in Philadelphia prior to applying for a job, not just the promise of the job. I mean, the way it was until recently was we could go on college campuses, military bases, other places in the country, attract high quality, diverse people, and then offer them a job and give them 6 months to move in. So in addition to getting a high quality person, we're getting a new family that's moving into the city. Look, I've been in council for a long time and I love all our council members. I just don't understand the rationale in changing that. It's like saying the only people from Philadelphia can play for the Phillies or Eagles. It doesn't compute.
All right, thank you both.
Thank you, Kristen. We'll now move to George Solis at Channel 6.
There we go. Sorry about that. I'm unmuted. So what more can be done from federally, like federal help? I understand that Police Commissioner Outlaw, you mentioned that there is going to be some kind of funding that's going to help for no resources in terms of technology, with hopefully helping recruit and hire more officers. What else do you think the city police force needs to kind of curb the increase in rampant violence?
Well, I think the good news for us with this public safety partnership is that it's a 3-year commitment where it doesn't require additional funding from us. Technical assistance is going to be huge. Again, we have a solid plan, but we're a learning organization. And what this does is allow us to not only benchmark against other agencies of comparable size with comparable issues, but it also allows peer-to-peer engagement. It allows for visits, exchanges, and it allows us to hone in on some key areas that we know we need to strengthen. I'm hoping that we get some pretty strong technical assistance in the areas of streamlining forensics and evidence and using our evidence as intelligence to inform and help clear cases, as opposed to what Director Garvey would say, as opposed to back in the day when, our labs were solely used to prepare folks for court. And then also how we could improve all the way around our clearance rates. So, while we do well in some areas, we don't know what we don't know. And there could be some other agencies out there that are doing this, that figured it out. But again, every city is different. There are a lot of different social determinants that vary from city to city. But again, what this partnership does is not only bring resources and outside set of eyes and opens the world up to those for us, to engage with others, it also brings it to the forefront. As being a selected city, we're not one of many, many, many cities. We know there's over 18,000 police departments in the country. This gives us priority. And so whether it's help with grant writing or whatever it is, the feds, quite frankly, before this have been very helpful. When I talk about task forces and our ability to get cases federally prosecuted so offenders have more exposure and harsher consequences, that's a thing. But again, I'm excited about the fact that we get priority as it relates to any technical assistance and any other resource needs that may come out of this. So some of this, we figure out what we need once the assessment is done, and that's typically what's done in the first year. They need to get a baseline understanding of where we are, and then we go from there.
And if I may add, in addition to the support that the police commissioner and the police department are getting through the community violence intervention that President Biden has laid forth, the city of Philadelphia is a part of a cohort of cities across the country who are more vulnerable to gun violence, and will be getting technical assistance, not only just in enforcement, but in policy and programmatic aspects as well. And so they're in the process of again, doing the assessment of Philadelphia, of what we have, what we need, and then there will be tailored technical assistance from national partners that will come to Philadelphia.
Without having to have you repeat yourself entirely, you mentioned multiple decreases in violent crime throughout the city. We touch on this often. How important is the community aspect of this? Obviously, some groups and people getting money, but just the down street level enforcement and talking to people on the streets, particularly the perpetrators who are, as we know, responsible for most of the violence.
Sure. If we look at kind of the undergirding issues that impact the gun violence, one of them is connectivity and cohesion in community. And what we do by investing in community organization is strengthen that cohesion that is happening in neighborhoods with those who are trusted partners, who have promising practices that are community-led, community-built, who have the trust of those who are at the most vulnerable of being victims, perpetrators, and witnesses of gun violence, and they can begin to mediate those crises as they happen on the ground, dissipate the beefs that are experiencing, and begin to train young people and those who are vulnerable to gun violence to look at their situation and begin to treat the trauma that triggers a lot of these reactions that we're seeing that lead to homicide.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. We're now going to go to Anna Orso at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi, everyone. My question is for Commissioner Outlaw. Commissioner, you've talked quite a bit in the past few days, especially about Operation Pinpoint and some of the gains that the department has seen in specific police districts. Given the reality of the historic increases in gun violence citywide, though, especially when you look at year-to-date shootings and homicides compared to before the pandemic, why should Philadelphians feel encouraged by gains in small subsections of the city when we look at the reality citywide?
Thank you for that question. And I typically don't like to throw out stats, but a win is a win is a win. And whenever there's positive information or an opportunity to show that either something is working or people are hard at work, we got to give people their kudos for that. Our officers are out here busting their tails, running in the direction of danger to keep things going. So, while statistically, that's quantitative data, there's a very real it's a reality that people are like, yeah, you might have these wins over here in these districts, but not on my block. And I understand that. I absolutely understand that. The purpose of sharing this information is showing that we're chipping away at it. And it's not going to turn around. Again, every time I talk about this stuff, I say since 2014, since 2015, there's been a steady increase. But I think we would be remiss in all of our duties as leaders not to share when something is working. People need to know that slowly we're chipping away at it. We're constantly out here hustling. Our officers and our civilian employees alike are out here doing everything that we can to ensure everyone's safety. We're doing our part. So again, I think it's important that people know that there are some wins here. And we're going to keep at it. So all of that to say, I don't believe in throwing the baby out with the bathwater or not sharing good news. Now, again, we have to be cautiously optimistic. I don't want to sell wolf tickets or give false hope, but people need to know that we're hard at work and we're not stopping at what we believe our mission is.
Okay. It's my understanding this strategy has been in place since 2019, I guess. Can you talk a little bit about, what you've learned in that time? Would you consider it to be a successful strategy at this point? And how do you think about it moving forward in, the next year or two?
Yeah, I can talk about Pinpoint, right? And that's how PPD operationalizes the administration's overarching strategy of the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities. It was kicked off prior to my arrival, but going back to the point that I made earlier, we didn't have a true operational framework. We didn't have the coverage that we now have. We didn't have the number of pinpoint grids that we had. We were, concentrated in only smaller parts of the city. We're now citywide. We didn't have the intelligence analysts assigned to each of the districts that have since expanded. We didn't have a very clear understanding of how information was to be shared and what roles and responsibilities were. So while, yes, there was something in place in 2019, very early on upon my arrival, it was made clear that there were some areas that could be strengthened. And we've only continued to grow and strengthen the plan as time progresses. I made very clear that in order for any of this to work, we have to have the resources that we need to do it. We don't have the same resources that we had a year ago. And quite frankly, another reason why I share positive information when we have it is to let people know that we're still making do with what we have the best way that we can. And there also has to be collaboration. And I believe that our collaboration with our state, local, and other federal partners have gotten stronger, much stronger, as evidenced by the partnership that we just announced and the fact that we're part of a White House initiative. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's a deal. So this is only improving over time, not discounting the fact that all of the things that we've been through in the last year and a half. So I think there's, again, been some lessons learned. We've been strengthening and improving as we go. And I look forward to learning whatever else comes out of the technical assistance that we get from the DOJ.
Thank you both. We're now going to move to Saj Purple Blackwell. Oh, Saj, you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. This question is for the Commissioner Outlaw and Mayor Kenny, or the powers that be that were responsible for the decision making. But you did point out that there, and specifically in the 14th district, was an 18% decrease in crime and in homicide. And my question is that attributed to, or can it be attributed to, the modification of the Bailey Agreement? It looks like you, back in the summertime, you all kind of put forth a modification to try to address a different type of stop and frisk, or a different way to look at stop and frisk. Has that been a direct impact in the 14th district specifically? And if so, again, are we going to continue that around the city?
I think that's a really good question, but I think it's too early to tell, because the pilot is fairly new. And so while we don't have that assessment yet, obviously anything that we implement, the whole point of a beta test or a pilot is to see, work out any kinks and then see if there's success. And if there's successes, how do we put that in a bottle and sell it? I like to say. So I look forward to having an answer for you on that. We just don't have it at this point because it's still too early.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then in regards to the safe corridors, do we yet have any numbers or projections on, how many police officers we do have working in specific corridors, or how many community groups such as Town Watch are involved, or volunteers? Or are we going to try to culminate some of those numbers? Because it seems like the fact that we did have 2 police officers there at the Lincoln High School shooting, we didn't have those same police officers at the Franklin Learning Center incident.
Okay, I can answer that. So in reference to the numbers, the numbers vary, which I talked about before. And at Franklin Learning Center, there were police officers there. As a matter of fact, after that shooting incident occurred, the officers arrested a male who was in possession of a gun. So there were police officers there at Franklin Learning Center, as well as school safety police. So they were definitely there. As far as the numbers, again, the numbers constantly change based on our staffing, what officers we have available, but we are focusing on schools that has a potential for increased violence around those schools. We have been working with school safety, the school district of Philadelphia. We had a meeting last week in reference to increasing our presence around certain zones within the school areas. We are now up to 25 zones. We'll be going to full implementation by Monday of next week. We have a meeting tomorrow to iron out some of the kinks in reference to staffing wise between PPD and school safety. So we are working on reassessing what we have in place now and what changes we're going to make moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saj. Thank you. We are now going to go to Brian Mendoza of Telemundo.
Hi there, good afternoon. If I could have Armando translate.
Good afternoon, Brian.
Hola, Armando. La primera pregunta es para el señor alcalde. ¿Cuál es la expectativa de él en cuanto a las organizaciones que se les ha dado estos subsidios para ayudar a combatir el crimen y la violencia en la ciudad?
The first question is for the mayor. Mayor, what are your expectations in terms of the local organizations that have been given grants in order to combat the violence in the city?
Or the ability of them to further empower them and to spread their influence and reach in these neighborhoods. These are established groups that have been doing this kind of work for years. We're giving them more capacity to reach more people and to put more of their own boots on the ground to get their arms around our kids and try to push them in the correct direction and not towards violence or death. So, I mean, we're just hoping to expand their capacity.
Bueno, nosotros queremos empoderarlos para que puedan usar sus influencias para llegar a sus barrios. Hay grupos hispanos que pueden llegar a la gente utilizando sus recursos para poder corregir la dirección en la cual van sus vidas, alejándolos de la violencia y de la muerte, por supuesto. Gracias. Brian?
Armando, gracias. And if I could do a follow-up question to that. Esto se ha registrado durante todo el año. Se le han estado dando subsidios a diferentes organizaciones. ¿Qué tipos de éxitos él ha visto con este tipo de subsidios para las organizaciones en cuanto a la lucha contra la violencia en la ciudad?
This is a follow-up question for the mayor. Mayor, this program that has been giving grants to groups in the city has been going on for about a year now. What sort of success have you seen as a result of this program?
I'd ask Erica if you could get on. You're more intimately involved.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for your question, Brian. What we have seen and what some of the successes have been. And so there are two grant programs. And so our Targeted Community Investment Grant Program has had now 4 cohorts. That is a smaller grants between $1,500 and $50,000. What we announced today was our new community expansion grants. And this is our first time doing this grant program of $100,000 to $1 million. So answering your question, but focusing on our Targeted Community Investment Grants, which we've done 4 cohorts for, our successes that we are seeing are increased number of participants in our grantees, continued engagement of our grantees in training and technical assistance based on their needs, and it's continued connectivity to city programs and city departments, and increased opportunities for funding for those organizations outside of the city.
Bueno, la respuesta, Brian, viene a través de Erika, que nos dice que se ha visto ciertos éxitos, pero solamente hemos tenido 2 subsidios que se han entregado para las comunidades que se han enfocado para esto, y ellos han tenido 4 subgrupos. Y estas primeras subvenciones han sido de $1,500 a $50,000, y por lo tanto esto ha permitido incrementar el número de participantes. Tenemos un nuevo programa de subvenciones que vamos a lanzar por primera vez, que va de $100,000 a $1 millón, y vamos a enfocarnos con las organizaciones de crecimiento comunitario para lograr su mayor participación, de manera que ellos puedan capacitar a sus miembros y llegar a sus comunidades y darles mayor conectividad con los programas y departamentos de la ciudad. Y esperamos tener buenos resultados por esto en el futuro. Gracias, Brian.
Armando, y para la comisionada, ¿a qué se le atribuye el éxito de la estrategia Pinpoint en ciertos distritos de la ciudad? ¿Y por qué esto le debería dar esperanza a los residentes de toda Filadelfia, quienes dicen esta violencia y el incremento de homicidios a lo que va del año los tiene preocupados y hasta con miedo?
The next question is for Commissioner Outlaw. Commissioner Outlaw, in terms of the success of the Pinpoint program that you've implemented in the districts, what sort of hope can you offer the residents of the city in terms of this success in order to quell the violence and the danger in the streets?
We are working collaboratively more than we ever have before. I talked about how we've expanded our targeted enforcement areas, or our pinpoint grids, to be citywide. We have strong relationships with our other law enforcement partners. And, too, I want to go back to Anna Horsel's question earlier. In addition to that, we do weekly shooting reviews. That wasn't done before. And this brings in every law enforcement partner around in the region and also federally, so that we're all on the same page as far as what's going on around one specific shooting. And we leave these meetings ensuring that there are action items and that we follow up on previous deliverables. We recognize that there's overlap between PHA properties, university properties. We're sharing data and information, and everybody has a clear understanding of what's going on in their world. Again, the communication is enhanced, the collaboration is enhanced, and with a very unique, precise focus in these targeted areas, we're seeing these gains. So again, I can't stress enough that we're working very, very hard, very diligently in a very challenging environment. And it's not just with law enforcement, it's with the partners that you see here on this call with us. It's with community partners, because a lot of, credibility comes from the messengers with lived experience, not necessarily those of us that wear the uniform. So I think we can continue to see just increased collaboration, increased communication, and we'll continue to do our part on the enforcement end to ensure that we're arresting the right people so that we can have impact. It's not going to happen overnight. It's just not, because this didn't come about overnight. This has been steadily increasing over the years. And what we're trying to chip away at is a culture. It's a culture of violence. There's so many other factors here, but we're one part. We're one cog in the clock, and we will absolutely continue to do our part.
La respuesta que nos da la comisionada Outlaw tiene que ver, obviamente, con el trabajo en colaboración. Hemos expandido nuestros objetivos. Obviamente, tenemos socios bastante fuertes que nos están ayudando. Y para esto hago referencia a la pregunta de tu colega Ana Orso. Estamos teniendo por primera vez repasos sobre los tiroteos que hemos tenido. Esto es algo que no teníamos anteriormente. Lo estamos haciendo con las agencias del orden y con nuestros socios a nivel regional y a nivel federal. Estamos viendo qué es lo que ha estado sucediendo, examinando estas acciones, viendo sobre nuestras metas que habíamos trazado, y también vemos que se juntan con otros objetivos. Estamos compartiendo datos también y estamos tratando nosotros, obviamente, de lograr una cooperación y una comunicación más cercana con nuestros socios, tratando de resolver estas inequidades. Y precisamente no puedo subrayar suficiente el trabajo duro y diligente de nuestros miembros de la Fuerza Policial de Filadelfia, las agencias del orden y también nuestros socios comunitarios. Nosotros, para tener credibilidad, tenemos que poder conseguir resultados y también tener los mensajeros adecuados. No solamente aquellos de nosotros que llevamos puesto el uniforme, para poder incrementar la colaboración y la comunicación. Y también, finalmente, recordarle a la gente de que este es un problema sistémico de larga data, que no se va a solucionar de la noche a la mañana, porque no se ha dado de la noche a la mañana. Se ha estado incrementando poco a poco, y también nosotros queremos cambiar esta cultura de la muerte y la violencia que tanto daño nos hace en la ciudad. Muchas gracias, Brian.
Gracias, hermano. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, everyone. I do want to give, we have a hard stop at 2:10, but I do want to give Dale Mezzacapa from Chalkbeat a chance. And then the rest of the reporters can follow up to press@phila.gov afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. So the principals union later on this afternoon from the school district are going to hold a press conference basically saying that they need more help from the city and more help from the police. They're going to be asking for safe corridors, but I think I just heard Commissioner Dale say that there are some safe corridors. So could you speak a little more to the details about are there safe zones and safe corridors around schools, and are they going to be expanded?
So currently we have safe corridors in place. We had them in place at the beginning of the school year. The problem is we don't have volunteers from the community who want to participate for walking around these safe corridors to assist with coverage. So it was pretty much law enforcement and school safety, and some folks from the school, such as school staff, are concerned. We established 25 zones, which will cover 35 schools. I will have a list of those schools next week. We have it now, but I don't want to put that out until I meet with the principals. The principals will be in contact with the captains of their respective districts. We will go into full implementation by Monday, which I mentioned, And we have a meeting tomorrow to make sure that all concerns are addressed in reference to these 35 schools that we identified. We also, the schools that are not part of this implementation, we also have officers who are assigned to police service areas, which are pretty much their zones that they cover on a daily basis. They also make periodic checks of these schools as well within their patrol zones. So just because those schools aren't part of the Safe Corridor or part of the initiative we're pushing forward next week, those schools are still being periodically checked by patrol officers as well. So that's where we are with that. I'll have more information next week on where we are with the program. And the reason why we are establishing zones, because we're noticing that we have police officers at the schools. We also are noticing that shootings are occurring a block or 3 blocks away from the school itself. So that's why we have to establish these zones to make sure that we cover at least a certain range around the schools while during dismissal and also during the morning time when schools are first starting.
And were the police officers who were on site at Lincoln, can you say, was that part of the Safe Corridor program that exists now, or were they there for another reason?
Yeah, so part of the officers who were there, they were there during dismissal. Some of the schools where we anticipate problems or potential violence, we have several throughout the city. We make sure we have police officers assigned to those schools. So that's why they were there.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your accommodation.
Yep. Thanks, Dill, and thank you, everyone. That concludes today's briefing. Reporters with additional follow-ups, again, can follow up at press@phila.gov. We'll reconvene actually next week because of this today's briefing being rescheduled from last week. So we will have our next violence prevention briefing next Wednesday, October 27th. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.